Namo Gurave Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Gurave Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Gurave Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sanghaya. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by practicing generosity and the other far-reaching attitudes, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by practicing generosity and the other far-reaching attitudes, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by practicing generosity and the other far-reaching attitudes, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. So we'll go ahead and start getting into verse 3, both the root verse and the commentary, and that starts on page 23. So we'll read the root verse together, verse 3, and then we'll go ahead and start with answering any questions or diving into any discussion points that we have on this verse. So please read along with us here, the root verse 3. The motion of body and life force is like a bubble, swiftly perishing. Therefore, contemplate impermanence. For after this life, just as shadow follows form, good and bad karmic fruits pursue us. So, the topic of emphasis on verse 3 is death and impermanence. And before we move forward, please keep in mind that if you have any questions or anything to discuss from the previous verses and commentary as well, please feel free to raise those. Just because we move on in terms of the reading topics as the weeks go on, doesn't mean we can't go back and examine any of the other previous topics. If anything, we should examine them more and more as we move through the text. So please feel free to discuss or bring up any discussion points or and raise any questions you may have from the previous commentary and verses as well. Okay, we have a question here online that reads, on page 23, Lama Tsongkhapa uses the term life force. It seems you don't see life force used that often, at least in my limited experience. So I was wondering if it is understood in the same sense that we are familiar with these days. Does it have any philosophical meaning? Sauce. Sauce. Tadi ruwa tadi peketa sorwa tadi nana judi nana life force la ruwa tadi tani dites kuran kandi ins tabor shumendo ani life force ne sungdo was ruwa ani the life force ne kuran shira Jampa nyos ro shira thoma nyos ani mixigi etanda quads ke yorvis life force la desma life bana perishashan life malal chirwa life force the soja sing ke je life force soja tembu se ke je memro se ke soja se ke je sho life force la ge te ani mixigi tanda ta quads mix yorvis sud yamana ani life force desma le koran page jabgi tanda de ya chik no peje dan tani chik quads ta chik mix quad ni ke yorvis
안테는 게임마다 그 중에 디저션들 이제 배 나로라 소라래 네 소유와 취취고 맞아 로야도 미 소지요 뭐 미 츠소세 저라 당서 르라는 조보라 미 츠소세 다 고 취 소유와 취취고 있을 그 때문에 말하다 오라 틱다네 뭐 티나로 인지 중에 디 가르주기 뭐 하고 말하다 간다스 중이라
and so to answer this question, the translation here and the terminology that was used in this particular translation is life force, quote unquote. However, if we look at the Tibetan word, it is so, which means life itself, and so it's meant to be understood as life, and not necessarily as if life force has a particular meaning on its own or something is being emphasized outside of our lives or life itself. Not that we know of, anyways, and we were referring to the Tibetan version. So when we think about so in Tibetan, that the translation for that, or the literal translation of that, is life. So I think life force is meant to be understood as life here. Rather than having a different meaning or philosophical meaning or connotation than life. So yes, that's what we want to share. Oh yes, yes. Oh yes, please, yes. So traveling mic for those that are here in person.
So about the life force, okay, obviously this is not what it's meant in the text, but nevertheless, it's a different term, right? It's not life force.
In my mind,
no.
And this is a discussion,
Yeah.
in my mind, life force has a little bit of a different meaning to
Yes,
life,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's like, how would you describe life force? What upholds life, I guess you could say.
Well, it's a faculty. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's a faculty.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So it's one of the 20 faculties.
Oh, right. Right.
Yeah, but
right.
I'm sure that this is not what it's referring to here.
Oh yes.
It's
yes,
life. Really,
it's
life
itself.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
in general, yes.
No, but it does have, yeah.
or 그런 게 자기 소가 아니 life force 라 되게 준비 켜봐 유 레스트로
콘이 버릇도 집고 얘기.
콘이 버릇나 아니 그런 거
지금 force라는 누가 나오지 마. 손은 칭이 줘도네.
오 세셔 봐.
소스야 돼 데멘드지 지.
오
거기
위치
가르쳐 남시도 아니 나시게 된체 디지얼 라이저.
the life force 딜을 자기면로스 life force 다 됐어 말라. 단다 데멘드지 비추는 거기 소도 장으시고
나시게 된
남시 댄치 있어요. 그제디 life force 자기면로서 단다디 이내 파기 life force 다 소 리소스 소랑 데랑 그래서
나중에 시지 보이 나노더라 르도 누가를 르소 요와 주의주의는 르도 소라 딜라이프라는 거
알아?
일단 레프트 가르 샤워를 라바이나 다티 지제 가르라기는 거지 아저기 소는 칭이 줘도 소스야 돼다 츠르 츠세원은 그런 가르 응원을 건지 지어라 데면도 지기 샤워에 지그랬어 딜라 가르 지그랬어 나시게 땡지 그랬어 근데 요나
알아.
지송
알아. 답하기 디나 잠버디다 디 리소 단들건 사진아요 집으로
네 근데
집으로 오래
그래도 그 파테는
파테너로
그래
so yeah just so you brought up the faculties and when it's brought up in that context and when it's not just like only in that context but when you examine further what we mean by life what's mentioned in the text and obviously in the context of the faculties as you mentioned there is life being the basis or the foundation of consciousness is what's explained in certain texts. So when we, and this is in the context of the faculties, but it can also be understood in general as well. If we, let's say we take out force, we just say life. What is life? Like what is that definition? If we actually examine that, then it would be understood as well as the basis or the foundation of consciousness or the mind. So if, yes, so this is an interesting topic of conversation here. If we're to ask, all our participants, the question of how, in the West, in our Western, conceptualization in psychology, in culture, how do we define life? Is it a form? Is it a consciousness? Is it, something that's none of the above? Is it a permanent entity, impermanent entity? How is it that we describe life here, in the West?
I'm not sure about the Western definition.
Yeah. So if we do take a moment,
but because in the question it's implied that there's a common understanding of what life force is,
right?
And
right.
maybe whoever asked the question meant life as well. So.
Right. And so in my mind, if you ask me personally, and we're all, this is a discussion here. So, life is the life that we experience, or the everyday kind of present existence, versus what carries that, or maybe serves as the basis of that existence. And that's kind of how it immediately kind of plays off in my mind. If whether that's valid or not is remains to be seen. However, when let's say like when we do like divinations, yes, like in the Tibetan Tibetan custom and tradition, we do divinations, and depending on the divination, let's say for someone who's sick, and the divination comes out as, oh, well, the life force is strong, so they won't pass because of this sickness, but it'll take some time to recover, for example. And so how I always translated that, the term that comes up in the text, like the divination text, or the result of the divination, I personally use life force. I would say someone, instead of saying, it's basically another way of saying, well, you'll live long, like but I would, when I've translated this term before, I would say, oh, well, your life force is strong. Like when people have come to me and said, with the divination, can you check out this divination for me? I see the divination master, he gives me the result, and he says, Soja Tembutu, means like you have a stable life force. So I use life force there. But what I'm also trying to say is basically that you'll live long, so this illness, for example, won't affect your life in terms of your your remaining alive and your survival. So that's kind of how it plays out when I think about it. But
this is not life force. Actually, it's appropriate to be mentioning life force in this context because, if I remember correctly, this is one of the causes of death. The exhaustion of life force is you have. Usually, there are three causes are given: exhaustion of karmically predetermined lifespan, exhaustion of life force, and exhaustion of merit. So, and usually, by life force, they're talking about the life force at the heart. So if it's exhausted, you can replenish it by doing what we call vase meditation at the heart. Is there such thing? Vase meditation. Yeah.
This is what. The current how Janju do us right. So the check this medarsh. Ani peres shashana. Parme tayo ani chin samsam. Check says it joy. Panada ani ta sunam ta sevitogi.
La mi tumbai na.
Ani mi tumbai na ro.
Na sunam seveto.
Sunam sevito seata.
And then joy. Jonga chamanya veto.
Chamanya veto. Ani check the ani ti chan na doasa.
Ana ting khazong azindi na ro.
Oh,
right. Didn't know what she saw.
Take the tentative. The hearts of
life forces.
Oh, that ninga the short chick. Chick come let in tearing time. You were sick. Soon do us attended. Do us, the circumstance life force current zone. She dreads. Life force is
that so
no.
It's the Om Hum meditation. I just remembered. This is what is recommended. It strengthens. You know what is it called? Forget the term, but you say Om and visualize winds gathering at your heart. And then Hum. What is the term? I forget. Vase breathing at the heart. No, it's not that. Anyway, but this is what this is what they're talking about.
What did you the
or kanshi the has so density zone the chain and shivers that was the soul density tinana life force sungdos but the soul so le this minarish denser roji chane lagu the jabu dos
the engine on those you the life la ditsani tsela dangasugi la na sola
or
sola di karre la da jodi nibale borda so di karre subreve ngasugi na chu na lo la so borda ngasugi di chitan yochi chama di karre la na taba da madaba ni no yo resche na madaba na lo la karre detsen sung che borda tsavi detsen chembo sung che yorda shibari de chama chochi le pasha tene sub region da chama chochi ta tini suda shiba khaya ma yin pen cha sha na ga kansa da uji cha sha wa na min da uji cha sha wa te zu kumbu de zinga zu mi la imar wa da ro ta mi la de zan kare ta ka de so ra suda shiba khaya ma yin be ne de men de chi sha go yo ra da ro mi de ma ta tenju lu le na ta yi na shi de an di ma si go ra ta do de ba ne kar shi wa ina consulti lascianarva 아니 마수기 뭐부 이제 참아야 되는 숨체고 요레스 숲체 시바체 안티니 가야 마잉에 지체고 요레스 다티니 가야 마잉에 나로라 당하는 숫대 하고 와도 누바한다고다 대수리도 참아든데 뒤로 왔다 메다바세는 메다바 그런 카르라나 안 수르 라싱 마르와 시바르 라싱 마르와 안 그런 카르라는 데면도 좀 되고 거다 수도 시바 가야 마잉에 데면도 좀 되고 거라 제가 다다데 나저기 나시기 땡첸이 단다 소디한 가르 콘도 되는 거는 수나로 되고요 말에 시바는 되고요 말에 딱디 가르쳐 올라 되잖아요 나시디 가서 니가는 니거를 나와라 나시 니가는 니거는 디 니야기 땡첸이 니는 되지래 시와다라
so yes, just kind of going back to the question of what is it or what is it made out of when we talk about impermanent phenomena which life is. We categorize that into 3 types: form, consciousness, and then that is which is neither. There's a separate group for that within impermanent phenomenon, and so life would be in that last category there of something of impermanent phenomenon or functioning phenomenon that neither falls under form or consciousness. And again, life is understood as the basis or the foundation of the mind or of consciousness. Yes, in the text, in the Tibetan context. Yes. Comment on the Chawatangin di Anitil and Shasharani Nuchobe and you some Latana and Chichavina crowns of quad Chichavina life forcing in the Ani the Kijish the Panji. Somebody Deagi never did 2 egg at a chick. Never show that, or the Nish Roda, the Nitola, or the Nish Tandar, the Nish Coors, like force like this.
Life force, life in the Cheva,
yeah. And so, while we talk about this topic, is there a difference between life and life force? Are they meant to be understood separately?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So here, a comment from the individual who asked a question regarding this topic says that in the West, life force is more likely to be used in a Darwinian sense, sort of a characteristic of survival for life force. Yes. Okay.
Life like the Pui no Tillajura. Miji Missilagram, Miji Missola. Since the Teja Dutanitana, the Castle life force like the Pui no Sora and Jewish and so said in Jewish and that life crown Judusane. Life crown Judusane, and also the Pui no Tsira. Oh, teaching, sir. Engine on the life force Chevayona. My Nazu Pena Chivijan, sit on soul Chevay Shay or rather. Sit on see Jidon that did not look at Zunu, so the scene trade on the so Krongarella and Cerelarwa. In a tiny bit on the lower down. The Kron and Zinche to Sani, the Digigan Mabora or no jubal in a life Carrellana, let Pachi life force sliding on the Pagu beach. Nanzu in it around a sword Carrella did say, Tinbaka and the Nevachilla, but yeah, Tamabasa the Chibapo.
So, just the terminology, depending on how it's used and when it's used, there could be kind of a different layer of context or meaning. If there is a difference between life and life force, it feels like there's a difference in the 2 terms in Tibetan as well, because you have soul, which is the one that's actually in the root text, in the prayer itself, life, and then you also have tse. So tse is actually, depending on how you're using it, might be the one that actually is closer to life, and then sok is the life force. If you actually go that deep into the terminology, they're both kind of used in an intertwined kind of way. But if you kind of maybe if you were to say that there is a difference between life and life force, you could say the same thing in Tibetan where there's tse and sok. So if sok, you start kind of digging around, and what is sok? It's almost described as tse, and so you're thinking, well, did they mean the same thing? Kind of in certain aspects, and in certain aspects they can be used differently. So yes. The next question, if we'll move on from the topic of life, is on page 28. The 4 points of karma. If I create good karma by one action on one day, am I right in understanding that its value continues to multiply over time? The same applies to bad karma. tanda tenzi nipa sharwa
Nas.
pewe kechi sharwa
Alright.
아니 the lengen ro shi mayina
응?
아니 shakdong machina
응.
아니 pigir sigwar was
Alright.
아니 가지 가서 niza shiza to sura ritsi shara
Alright.
아니 lengen de pegruina 아니 le sangwa ro shi mayina ro
대패로.
어디 pigir ves
아.
지bar ves
지부시잖아요.
지bar was
레딩 지부시잖아.
Alright. Yes, so yes, the answer to that is that yes, in terms of if we can all turn to page 28, we'll get a better idea of the 4 points. The second point, karma that is not purified multiplies in power. So this also does apply to virtuous karma or good karma as well. So yes, if you create good karma one day, then yes, it does multiply as well. Mani dagi dojo sharo. Di tanda chojik do ro di tsana ni di ka khadi chogo da da shara.
빼디지 라가.
Ore.
다다 가서 디 레춘유지 사네 디 지만이 단다 친구 두고요 같이. 중된디 안에 나루다의 종샤도 페비스 베메지기 산지도 디표도. 대지 라도 대라는 것을 들어. 대 나오라. 대기 수셔죠. 다 라도는 가지를 인지다. 가지도 매모한 표도.
Ore.
제가 그때 표별 때네 아니 고마움받는 상지 리면서야기 지와 시에서레스 지는 논대난도
Ore.
다디 논대난도 전 디페메디 추가 되기때 상지기디 그런 시라추의 체도 시라다 단다라 라야기 체도 서로 지라 아들이 체도 주니 마송으로 나스 텐데로한테 중국 말했어 세저라다 고디 가지디 바모칸 표할 땐 지만 상지 레멘 텐데레 추가 시야게 텐데 용말전에 베메디 추가되기 이마셰체 상지도 주마송 때 쉬도
Ale.
다디 마송을 쉬라는 고아다바나 상지지 디치런데 신나르다의 사변용 가르상래 신리지오도 신다 콜롱아제 펜션도 마리버 쿠르네비 신동 첨부 지신 표와라 벤젠의 디진도 안에 레 총사바이나 리고 첨부 중화인데 요레스 전에 송도 안에 공개하고 되는 신이 이체버렸어. 인조디 들어가다 거기다 이게 맞춰 버렸어요. 또 추가돼. 그러. 또 상지기 가르사 모라기 라도 바모칸 표할 땐 지마 상지 레멘 때 제사라스 야 되게 소나 첨부지 사토지 말이야. 그 표야 중요지 못도 표지 못었어. 그때 상지기 바지 그런 지 근데 최악의 체도 이제 준송 신사를 된. 근데 좀 마송 신내 쉬도. 대 쉬도 전다 상지기 호된데 말에다스. 아니 가 저런 빼지시고스. 신나루다서 신첨부 주요 살아야 하는데. 디 로디 춘유시를 왔어. 근데 저 춘유디 마살 답전 지마 신디 신동대 첨부 쇼지 제제. 신동대 첨부 쇼지 되니 신지마 신디기 와라야. 아니 가서 왔다 신다콜로 먼저 신다콜로요라. 신다콜로 nga자도 파츠 아니 펜션도 마리버 근데 디월 노트해야 되는데 신도 전부 찍도 왔어. 대지하나 저런 게 리춘유지 사방이나 마음받는처럼 아니 가서 리버 전부도 스토어요. 레스티도 숨바레스 디송도자는 대신에 주가디 이 제전에 과 조샤로 대체버렸어.
So we wanted to share a backstory with you to emphasize this point. And Geshe and I are both referring to a backstory that's mentioned here in the liberation in the palm of your hand. If you happen to be following with this version that I have here, translated by Michael Richards, it can be found on page 434. And so this is under the subsection called Karma Shows Great Increase at the bottom there. And the backstory is that when the Buddha visited, I'll go ahead and read it, it's just a small paragraph. When the Bhagavan, or the Buddha, visited the city of Grodika, a woman gave him a handful of sweet meats made of sesame. called ladus. The Buddha predicted that in a future life, the woman would be reborn as a Buddha called Suvasti. Her husband irreverently said, "Please don't say such a thing just because she offered you some food, Buddha." The Buddha gave the illustration of the seed of the pipal tree, which is only the size of a mustard seed, yet from it grows such a huge tree that its shadow falls over 500 chariots, placed so that they do not touch each other. Buddha then said that small karmic actions have great results, and so the husband came to believe. And so, so the husband was quite skeptical that such a small offering from his wife could bring about such a great result. And he was like, I think, Buddha, you're just pulling our legs here. Maybe you're just doing this to get more food, or saying this so she feels good. But the Buddha brought up the example of the mustard seed that grows into such a great tree that its shadow covers over 500 chariots. And so, yes, this is an example used to emphasize the point. The second point of the four that we're covering at this moment as part of verse 3.
Did he criticize the husband?
He was skeptical of the Buddha.
He criticized the Buddha.
Yeah, saying, how is that possible? Yeah. Yes. If you have any questions, anything, yes, please feel free to grab the mic as we go.
Thank you so much for having us over. I'm sorry we came uninvited, but thank you so much for having us. We will come back, I think.
Of course, yes.
You have teachings on Sundays, right?
Yes, we have Sunday morning services or teachings, and then Monday meditations, as well as this class here on Wednesday, yes. Oh, yes, of course. Well, it's great to see you, yes.
I have a question.
Yes, of course.
Just a quick comment and then a question. The part where it mentions the bubble, and uncannily enough, I just learned someone in my personal life will probably pass away soon, and it was like a bubble. Everyone knew this was a possibility.
Yes.
But somehow none of us realized it in the moment until it was actual.
Yes.
And you can see it ripple. And within that, I'm wondering if there's any practical advice on how to remain present and turn to the Dharma rather than fear or frustration or anger.
Chubupe shayadi shush dawur shasra.
Nas.
Ani crowns mushimbachi. Ani cause hope kana din stombrus.
Nas.
Same that nami pinya de sama ha guaris that tik that pije try imbadi.
Nas.
Ni hope kana tik din de takiski jobo dawur samson shik misugan chari yamaris. Ani mune chane tipe te dawur shush tuus.
Nas.
Pedini pe dawur shas.
Nas.
Ani that din de tamjubjimi that chongchimarwa.
Nas.
That din de kabla ya chikshana ngamra ani si maki bachae ke chik kodam la ya tabji la ya chu chik sam khasur
Sintimaya tashi talam
kariyor sesh odini rush
de chonde chewara la wara
khande shores
te ngazo ta lendi kola sta da samda jera pena tanda de na la lendi kola tanda chiwa guchu so samba se chimede zawa sumda ani jongse na ba goche tu sa ji do o de su ye samda kurata zo ro de rang rang de ko miss ya di chiwa nge bara da so yin ro ba so yin chiwa nge bara ko legi na bara me ba sam chi ko ron legi to so ro de zo ro de chin ro yo teni 아니 디치로라 양수기 조바 체보다 딜지 신도 체보이나 존디스 미시게요 말하다 아니 딜리장 아니 코랑 치사베제야 디제라 먼저디 기왕어야로 된대요 근데 제보이는 콜펜 거라 때문에 알아서 심바 주시고 제보이네 코랑에 팽 말에 아니 어서 수수이네 존디스게요 말했어 제가 대인도 장소 신타체야죠 다 코랑 레 땡케 말에 치아기 두서디 두스 땡케 말에 아니 그 미수 인바이네 지보지 않다 마친 대통령 수지 유명한 인자 치고고요 두서든지 제를 내용도 전에 고치는고요 땡케 말에 저한테 처음 답하고는 상도 담아이나 아니 그 미사만 연구요 같이 인도 전 거 하나 더 해야 되는 데 쇼심바 조야 개가 말했어 안 디제라 야슈 총만 디제라 개와체와이나 한 상지분 더 나눠야 아니 아주 소소 년주에 당주와요 조인마인자 안디제라 준비 제와等的 제와이나 거기 코랑 팽교 같은 데 쓰는 데스 제와이나 한 소소인에 로데오 용으로
So in the moments where we experience intense emotions due to someone's passing, obviously someone close, as a means of alleviating intense sadness, stress, and suffering, one of the ways that we can kind of go about navigating those emotions is by thinking about death in, I guess you can call it a practical way, understanding that we all will have to eventually pass. There's no one that can escape that. Not no one that can escape that, but no one is free from that process of dying. And so understanding that you're not alone in that. This is not exclusive to that person who passed. This is not something that they had to suffer through just on their own, or that no one else will experience. This is something that we'll all experience. Maybe, there's a sense of an understanding of a natural processes, a natural flow of life, and then eventual death. And then also understanding that everyone has to go through this. Maybe there's a sense of a stronger, maybe humanity involved, or a commonness or oneness. So that would alleviate any sense of feeling alone. And then two, understanding also, or thinking about that, yes, we have these emotions. We had a certain connection with this individual, and now that they're no longer with us, or they're no longer with us physically, that we're affected by it. But understanding that being that dwelling so much in these overwhelming, unpleasant emotions, neither will benefit them now that they've passed, or us. And so that's another approach that we can take in terms of how to look at the situation when we go through, when we're experiencing someone's passing. And then the third thing is, on the flip side, is rather than wallowing and dwelling in such unhappy, unpleasant emotions, knowing that it will not benefit us or the person who passed, what we can do is focus on the virtue and the positives of not only their life, and rejoice in that, but also dedicate our own virtue and our good karma and our merit to their fortunate rebirth and their coming, they're encountering with the Dharma, and eventually, through doing so, getting close and achieving the highest states of liberation and enlightenment. So kind of taking a positive take and finding, rather focusing on them no longer being here and that sorrow, focus on what the positive and meritorious things that they were able to cultivate in their life, rejoicing in that, and also reminding one of one's own positive deeds and dedicating the good karma and positivities accumulated through that, and dedicating it to the person who passed away. So, yes.
Sanji gingema, Sanji sheshu bikola ne pemenchi tambo puji chong de sana kushbe shuji sente che ne bit kala de sama samat de shumares che da ne Sanji lende motor mamu na chen kong lende gon la samu ma yota ne je le pu mau shu chong de si do pu mau shu chong de sana ko sente chen de chigo mares tene meso a te churang ma pu chi chong de sana shuji sente che a chi de sam pu de ne mamu chong de churang nya sama do khare la de sana de tanang ma Yama ngaron te lendri ko la naja chun machine ngare je la ne Sanji ge lendri ge naja ten on te ko le se ya de lan do to me ma tendri yin pa ni dang tendri yin de chan de ngaron te sen che che won sim ta na ma je ba chung sen tendri yin sen ya ma tendri Sanji she ju ko tendri chung ngares.
So a lot of emphasis can be placed on reminding oneself and better contemplating and understanding the law of cause and effect, or karma. And Geshe Tsultim was referencing another backstory to the time of the Buddha, when an individual whose child has passed away came to him, and in grief and sorrow, and it was in this interaction that the Buddha introduced her to the concept of cause and effect, and life and death, and how it's pervasive to all beings. And she was able to habituate herself with that concept, and it eased a lot of her pain. And later on, there came a point where a number of young children had passed, and she didn't, of course she was affected, but she wasn't as sorrowful in terms of intense emotion when that took place. And when others approached her and said, well, how come you're not emotionally overwhelmed like when your own child passed away? She mentioned that having after understood and come closer to the concept of cause and result, of the law of cause and result in life and death, through the teachings of the Buddha, she was much better prepared to maintain a calmer state of mind. And so, yes, that's something, again, emphasis on law of cause and effect, and beginning and end. So those things are, those concepts are things that one can think about when experiencing these difficult moments. There's one question here before you continue, Vladimir.
Just to finish up.
Oh, yes. Oh, okay, yes.
Because you asked about practical advice, and in general, isn't it the characteristic of a lam-rim that it's very practical? This the whole idea of the lam-rim is to take Buddha's advice as a practical suggestion, which means that this is really what this is all about.
Right.
There is nothing more practical than these meditations, what we're studying, because there are no shortcuts. So it's a matter of meditating. It's not just. Also, when we are overwhelmed with emotion, experience strong emotion, we cannot really apply this technique on the spot.
Right.
We have to be prepared.
Yes.
And the only way to prepare ourselves is by meditating on these particular topics. But still, it's kind of a strange thing, because obviously one of the problems we're having when somebody close to us dies is because we realize, that maybe subconsciously, that we'll get to that point ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is probably the most terrifying thing, really.
Mm-hmm.
All the fear stems from there.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, by meditating on these topics, I'm going to die. That's one of the ideas. That I may die today. You know,
Yes.
if you
Yes, yes.
meditate on that thought.
Right, right.
Oh,
Yes.
I mean, wouldn't that will that inoculate, so to speak, one against being overwhelmed by his fears,
Yes.
or will it have the opposite effect, actually, overwhelm a person with this? Well, just the thought of it. I mean, if you dwell on that thought, this is terrifying.
You're
If
right.
you really grasp the meaning, it's absolutely
Right.
horrible thing.
Right, right, right,
So
right,
I'm just
right, right.
speculating
Yes.
here.
Yes.
But that's the idea, is that this is how you prepare yourself. This is the
Yes.
practical. Is all
Right.
these are meditations, right? That's what
Right.
we're doing here.
Right, right,
Presumably, we're learning how to meditate, right?
right, right, right. Tani, tamsi pejana yonde ma, chomi dava ko, soye ti ani, zinireki, khasor, mus mesina, enchi jawa yuding in the ras, tagas panan kilo sonde marwas, kayu lai, hune chani, ngui nisi tan timba, ma sungu arwas, ani, di sungu arwas, tani, mi drawing this ambas. Alegi,
Gishinobu? Oh, Gishinobu is opposite choice.
correctly. That's okay. Did you have an appointment with him, or? I see. Is it? Order. Oh, okay, that's okay. That's right. Okay. I forgot that I was doing this in Tibetan. No, that's okay. That's all right. That's a good question. And I think, as you mentioned, I think it does take practice. It's not always easy to be applied right away. But even if it is, let's say even like an aspect of it, not the whole thing, but maybe a part of it, it could bring quite an immediate impact. But again, this is something that you work towards, and it is terrifying, you know. But yes, yes.
Somebody, don't worry, she or he died, but we're all gonna die.
Right, right, right. So instead of collectively scaring everyone, the intention is that, well, it's a natural part. Yeah, it sounds very cliche, but death is a natural part of life, if you will. Let's just run with that phrase. And I guess we're in this together. That's one thing that can be derived from it. And then again, kind of an acceptance. There's no sugarcoating here. An acceptance of the natural process of impermanence. And it's actually through this fear or terror that we take action. And in that action, and knowing that there's something we can do about this, however short or long term it may be, is where a lot of the joy is meant to be derived. And comfort is meant to be derived, rather than fixating on most of what's the content of the lower scope chapters. You know, and so I think that's the way it's meant to be understood, rather than just kind of a fixation. Because if you know about it, kind of the downsides of life, but you're unable to do anything about it, or kind of have that impact in a way so that you can counter that in some way, then it becomes a real drag, doesn't it? Then it's now you're frozen. Might as well, maybe it was better that you didn't hear about it. You know, just let me turn on some TV and let me just relax. You know, why bring this up now? Now I'm just scared to death. And then feeling that you can't do anything about it, but that's what's discussed. You know, when we talk about, let's say, even maybe the concept of samsara can parallel this, because if we just think about samsara in general, oh gosh, that's like the most drab, dreary thing, just this ever constant cycle. But the fact that we can liberate ourselves, liberation, I mean, the whole term itself is already uplifting. That no, it doesn't have to always be that way. There's a freedom, you know, the truth of cessation, and then obviously a path leading to that cessation. So that's kind of where, again, using the examples that we have over the past few weeks of the doctor and the patient, okay, it's one thing to go and to a doctor and then be diagnosed with something. That's terrifying. That's obviously if it's something even worse, like a terminal illness, that's awful. But if there's something you can do about it, then okay, that kind of brings back the equilibrium. I mean, I had something recently where, it was almost like, it was really like catastrophic, or it started to feel catastrophic. And then later, after, when I actually was able to speak to the professional, they were like, oh, and it's not this way, there's something. And then that obviously brings things back to and then if you're able to maximize that, the good side of it, not only does it balance, but then you're now kind of tipping the scale in favor of the positive side. And so that's I believe that's what's meant to take place as well over time in terms of practice. But when you first read it, obviously it can sound quite overwhelming, and then when it's difficult to say that with a smile, and it's difficult to kind of just drop a bomb in the middle of a family gathering. Let's say, oh well, this individual just passed away. Well, that but hey, that's just life. We're all going to be, we're all going to, it might impact, it's the execution of that, and the impact of that might, a certain maybe skillful means or a skillful way of executing that might be required, of course. But generally, in terms of the concept and in terms of personal understanding, that's what we're trying to derive from the practical aspect of looking at it. So, yes.
I think that in the lam-rim Chenmo, and maybe here I can't find it right now, but he specifically states, Jorin Puche, that the purpose of this meditation is not to experience intense fear due to, as a result of realizing that we'll be separated from everybody we know, everything that's near and dear, and all friends and relatives, and not to be paralyzed by that kind of fear. Definitely not. This is not the point of it, right? He specifically states.
Yes.
It's just that
yes.
One wonders how to achieve that balance. So that, but you said, but
yes.
It's just enough fear to develop. Would you say to develop concern for future lives?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes. And then again, I mean, I think it'd be reflected here on one of the concepts that we just mentioned about the small cause bringing a great result. And I think that can be applied to any part of life, including our practice. So even though we can't jump directly into becoming a great lam-rim practitioner, whatever small imprints, whatever little steps we can take will slowly lead to that. And so I think that's that's something that can be understood, or we should try to understand, rather than being paralyzed by the first section of the lam-rim. 저도 그런 뒤 안에 당연히 가려고 그래. 아니 예. 근데 처음에 따고 이 제시 당 송되게 아니
배치조스도 메로.
알레 오래. 저버. 세션. 저도 아니요. 아니 밖에 태양이 나게. 태양이 All right, well, yeah, so the first mic ran out of battery there. We're going to switch it out real quick. This is really an interesting interaction, and we're glad everyone's along for, I guess we could call it, parts of the ride. Things will, impermanence for you. There you go, impermanence. So we gotta change the batteries here. 니고 계시잖아. 채워대 어디다 하라. 니 채워대 하라. 니 있어요. 니고 or 단징은이 das 가서 이제 라데 이제 타오르셔. 아니 먼저 삼아. 예. 치유의 코드마. 지 로디로. 아니 오늘 전에 다 딜레트니 심시게 보시러 왔다. 먼저 삼아 드니 줘야 인데서 말다 지. 예. 다 아니 딜레트니 다 지. 예. 취체버려. 심슈다 좋아게 하셔라다. 등신 들레 야. 등지 초보에 쇼레스로. 아니 디 아니 칸스나. 디 첨발될 때는 문이 전에 저점이었어요. 예. 먼저 봐서는 가와게지. 이제 취재할이야. 탑시를 해도 왔어. 싫어. 또 이는 양식으로. 아니 미 호흡관을 미 근데 섬을 따오나. 아니 다 휴식을다 나는 봐. 그래.
신나지냐.
미 처음에 섬을 먼저 做 거기 섬을 줘다 지금 또 뭐여야 돼. 수지 아니 코로나도 처음부터 수지 수수 뒷면이 뭐지 줘야 이마디 디셔나게 거라서. 또 수수 건지 디르다.
그래. 센티도 레옹.
슈라로다. 로다 동무서 미 처음부터 알리 젤이야 수수 잡로라. 가르쳐 가르쳐 괜히 뭐지 수수는 줘야라서네. 두에디도 거라서다. 아니 일단 현재 시기다 슬란서 막 슈스타 거시라서다 베베나. 신나 사실 있어야 돼. 먼저 지어야 돼라서다. 다들 오늘 저는 디 취재를 먼저 탑으로 왔어. 더 얘네야 호흡관을 따도 뭐야? 신나 코로나 기배. 배. 슈스타사로 왔어. 다는 아니 베다. 아니 저 기회한테 좀 컨디스기 왔어 되게. 그러? this couple was the new couple and some kind of showers.
쓰르
집어다. 집어다. 공공들. 신앙 당티당 아니 저 따직 이러 추진되기도 군 참자서 간지 샤워를 재미 짜는 하디 그랬어.
네 두스라 짜는 라디에 되는 말이야. 이네 치월에 잡아야나. 다 드스디 단다 다다차. 그래서 자야지로 와. 치월에 잡아든 가정 하와에는 야야랬어요. 잡아이는 안티젤다. 다 책을 했을 때잖아요. 내가 삼도 제기로다. 땅에서 계속 치아 있는 게 가르쳐 오래서야 될 거라. 가르쳐 오래다 되잖아. 다 시도자는 하나 가르쳐야 되어야 될 삼도 될 거라. 다 시도 하나 가르쳐야 되었을 때잖아요. 준노노 저도 단연로도 시험 참아게 타나랑 루이정 키야요 말아. 그래서 특히에도 되잖아. 땅 안에 제주지마도 모두 가르쳐 오도 다 최최오도 세죠라. this 삼도 될래야 돼. 계시 오라다 지원다 보세요. 팅안서 지단 셰바이나라 마셰바이나라 상루 타고 이 응원이 수로다. 그라 응원이 수인데 맞아 딜라 베트라chen 최첸도 매워던데 대대하게 말스 간스놓고 응원이 수디 가지고 응원이 수디랑 가서 짜대가 있는데 짜고 되면 오시라. 당 응원이 수디라 티 용구요 번데 땡캠버에 다 딜라 짜는 가서 베트 생활이 맞이 되어들리자. 아니 어떻게 짜네 딜이 타야게 상고 제고 그때 산도도 제도잖아요. 아니 신이 당이 최체는 뭐도 최체와는 안 지도잖아요. relation 줘야 되스라. 최기 니당 야고 차용도 전 지도잖아요. 최네. 제목과 저바지하면 돈 시초라. 그래서 트라바데 가진 조가 뭐를 용와이나 안 지도 잡먹고 진짜로요. 되면 어제 트라바데 최는 뭐죠? 안 치가 맞다 되는데 제사로.
So when it comes to the fear, the intense fear and terror in regards to death arises. What's important, and a lot of the time, when we encounter difficult thoughts or emotions or moments, is that we pivot to what can I do about it. For some it's natural, for some it might not be, but if it's not, then it is important to remember that, okay, all right, well, it's one thing that we're all going to die. But again, kind of like we mentioned earlier, of what benefit is it if I just am paralyzed by this? The second question needs to be, well, is there anything I can do about it? And what is it that will impact me when I die? What is it that I can take? And that's when one of the points here on page 24, if you look, at the time of our death, the third point there, at the time of our death, nothing will help except our Dharma practice. So if you're to examine, okay, well, I'm going to die. What can I do about this? What can I take? What's going to be left? What's going to be the last thing that makes a difference? And that will guide you and direct you to Dharma practice. And so instead of, obviously as intense as that fear can be, rather than being stuck in paralysis with it, it's important to remember to examine and take a next step and ask the question, well, what can I do about it? And so if we can keep that in mind, that would help to alleviate the fear rather than be stuck in paralysis. Always kind of taking a proactive approach. And if anything, it is from this context that if anything, fearing death earlier in life is best, because you can then prepare and take action. If by the time you're on your deathbed and only then do you start feeling death, then it's a little it's a little bit difficult to do much at that moment. But the earlier we're familiar with this concept, and the earlier we embrace it, the earlier we analyze it, we accept it, then the easier and the earlier we can take action in terms of practicing the Dharma. If we think about it, so much of this fear of death comes from a grasping and attachment to this life alone. When we think about death and the eventual end of this life, if anything, it gives us a look into the next lives and a focus on the next lives. And if one has that greater scope of vision, if you will, the impact of fear is less, because the focus on just this life is less. So if we can think about kind of where that fear comes from, again, a lot of it is because we are solely focused on just this life. If we think about future lives, then just this one lifetime becomes minute and becomes minimal. And so death, the concept of death, when thinking about it, doesn't impact us as strongly. And so abandoning the grasping and attachment to this life is greatly emphasized in the teachings on death and impermanence. So that's something that we can actually take a bit of inspiration in and eventual joy in, rather than dwelling in fear.
주어 치마 펜죠 다 주어 치마 펜죠 딜리 존데 라우 총바 이나네 산지 고반 토야라 오늘 자네 산지 고반 토고도 세야기 치롱 니당라오데 레베니마들 안에 주어데 베티 내제도 말다 주어 참지 레거와 제가 대인도 전에 아주 대도라다 자모지도 전 너무 양천보다 총진 신앙 쇼체는 바 총산의 양파기를 지우시오 차되어다 라우라다 라 너무 용 총 양들이 총야들이 도와다 신앙 자우시오들이 총지 파기래서도 지우여서라야 근데 자모지야 되는 도와라 추나도 총야라고도 아요 근데 뭐부터 제가 또 뜻은 너무도 그래라 너무 그 신앙 지어를 신앙이 잠니 그러냐 대화던 거와 친구지요와 대제고
So if we take that approach or that lens of focus on the future, not only does it shift the intensity on this life, the intensity of focus on this life, and in turn it brings a certain expansion, a release of focus. But within that focus on the future, you can look at it through the aspect of the three scopes. Let's say, okay, well, we can go one step and say, okay, well, let me just think about the immediate future life. So there's one level of release of focus from this life alone. And then this, we take it to a greater scope, okay, well, so it's not just the immediate future life or the one after that, it's going to keep going. So how do what about liberation or nirvana or freedom from samsara? And then eventually after that, even if we take it to the ultimate level, the ultimate state of enlightenment, not only freedom from samsara for myself, but the great state of enlightenment for all sentient beings, kind of being the ultimate scope of all things. You're expanding that to the most that it could be expanded, and each time you expand, let's say even in the context of the three scopes, each time you expand, that focus becomes less and less on this life. And when you think about that ultimate state of enlightenment, or the ultimate goal, the ultimate scope, seeing how powerful and how great that is, when in comparison to this, the conserves of this one life, there's almost an inspiration. There's an inspiration, and there is a joy, and there is a relief to be had in that. And so, that's in terms of just keeping an eye on the future or thinking about the future rather than this immediate life. There's even levels to that. So if you kind of keep that in mind, that's a way to keep the inspiration going and the joy going. Basically thinking about the result of the three different kinds of results. And obviously, if we can, think about the ultimate result, the greatest result, which is the state of enlightenment. So when you think about the result rather than the immediate hardship to get to that result, it always works to keep you inspired and keep you going and keep your eye on the long term. Yeshama mentioned, let's say we have these activities that initially seem really scary, but after we go through them, there's like this really great gratification and satisfaction. Yeshama mentioned like bungee jumping, let's say. It's really scary when you jump from that cliff or from that bridge or whatever, but once you start bouncing around, or let's say you take a dive from a cliff, 50 feet, whatever the record is. It's really scary when you're standing on that ledge, but once you jump and then you land in the water and there's that gratification, there's that satisfaction that you accomplish something greater than that fear. And so likewise, the concept that we're discussing now can be seen in that way, in terms of the result being greater than the immediate fear. And that should be a condition in helping develop inspiration and joy rather than paralysis in fear. I'm going to read another question here online, and it reads, on page 24 at the bottom, I found it interesting how the certainty of death can inspire one to not indulge in negative deeds. That's something that can easily be argued against, but I find it very much to be a matter of perspective. The bottom line, I found it how the certainty of death can inspire one to not indulge in negative deeds. That's something that can easily be argued against, but I find it very much to be a matter of perspective. If we to look at this, two makes a remedy, some zerush. Any wall in the Harsung Shasana. Any never chua, so in sure was. Any tea temple tennis. Any Migivich Lenge, South Migiv, ele Masala, any tablam. To do good was. Yawshush doos. Any Mishandaina. You know, you want to see what it is, right? Details of Montreal, oh, don't they take your share? They share never did it give it on it. Oh, can't much patch it, that you can't condition. Leader of Saint Anthony, Kongin, you see this, right? The Yin Koran, Tadan the Shevin Shush, Yabutungu do something. No.
That's just did not you jar the Sunday, the non chugi Tomaching it to the ya. And she would chamber lam. This is song, Sra. Chuamadava the Shanama, Majestra. Take somewhere the Gubat is the little tour. But then Julian so done that this shit or this take issues on the store. The non chula Tomashu Yaji by Nanako quadrant. Tanda di Nanchu Manshu Yaji, each on the young age, she are in Rodigo, this and the Tadi. That's on the each and using by the deco. Devotion Kimaning in the Shia and Leshata, Conjuman Pacheturis. Anyway, Chesati, this and Nanchula Tomo Mashu in Chimaina, Nella Lindit on the Shinia and so that the Conatimaja chat, Nella, the Jarum Chinaju to Sunanda, Tony, the Jidin, the stand up. And the Tony is down at the Chanju Center, Shinju, which is the one with the Sudan Shijada. Mabunujin, the Shinju Yawachen, and Tabaset, Toya Yosara Yosamaris, Sanji Koma said, Toya Yosarama, the Shinju Mabuche, Ratapation, Samana de Leoniva, but the Kogi River, the Yawasam Tama in Antama de Lacunum, Shini Yajura, Shini Deva Toy, and Shini that the lam-rim that the desert landed on the Nuclear, the Chevania wireless.
So we're, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to assume that the certainty of death, what was brought up here was that the certainty of death can inspire one to not indulge in negative deeds, but that can easily be argued against. And when we say it can be argued against, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming that this means that, oh well, if I'm going to die, instead of refraining from negative deeds, why not just go crazy? Why not have a ball? If it is argued against, right? If it is,
well, he's referring to specifically to the last. Did you read the last paragraph there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if we have a strong sense of our permanence, we would be completely unaffected by
Right.
anything.
Yes.
So it's not that we will engage in negative deeds,
Yes.
but we will not develop bad character. We're not going to have negative emotions if we're strongly convinced. Nothing can touch us. Right? That it just it's not worked out. The reasoning is not very well worked out. That's the point. Do you understand what I'm saying?
The reason.
Okay, the reason why we engage in negative deeds is that we have a strong sense of our own permanence.
Right.
This
Right.
illusion of permanence leads us to act as if we're going to live forever, and to entertain harmful intent, jealousy, competitiveness, anger, and so on. It's not clear. The logic is not. See, it just doesn't.
Yeah.
So it has to be explained a lot more. But,
Right.
But
Right.
on the basis of this,
Right.
what we're hearing here, it doesn't
Right.
follow. It just doesn't
So
follow.
if we look at that,
that's
if
the
we look at
point.
that sentence there, and if we see, and maybe the individual who asked this, when it's mentioned that that's something that can easily be argued against. Maybe you can emphasize that. But if we look at the first sentence, which is what is being commented on, we get this formula that we can become inspired to minimize our indulgence in negative deeds. So that negative deeds, so if we're arguing against that, how would we argue against that? We would say, well, if death is certain, then, right, is that it? I don't know. If we run with that, if we run with that version, and this is what Geshe and now we're just discussing, and please feel free to share other versions as well. And thank you for sharing that, Vladimir. But so if we are to say that it can be argued against because, well, if it's certain that I'm going to die, might as well have a great time and actually indulge in negative deeds rather than refraining from them. What was I saying here? So if one were to argue and say, oh, well, if death is certain, then why would I refrain from doing what I want, just go crazy? This kind of argument, if you will, this kind of argument to that may come more easily to those who don't already maybe have a conceptual understanding of Buddhist fundamentals. If that is the case, then often, as His Holiness has mentioned to certain teachers and certain geshes who hope to teach the lam-rim, particularly in the West, he says, for those, examine who it is that you're teaching to. If they're brand new, without this kind of pre-experience or pre-conceptualization of Buddhist fundamentals, it's probably a good idea to start from the middle scope instead of jumping directly into jumping just straight in the order of the text from the small scope, because the small scope it does raise these intense emotions of fear and terror. So instead, that might be counterintuitive or counterproductive to their gaining a sense of joy and an incentive to follow the path. So what's important is to have a basis of joy and inspiration, and in an understanding of the concepts of cessation, the ultimate states of liberation and enlightenment, to have those as a means of spurring one on and spurring one's practice, rather than just kind of start with a very morbid kind of bleak outlook. And that's not what is meant to be emphasized. And I have seen that mentioned before in like certain texts, and they're actually addressed, particularly for readers in the Western context. I actually put it was in our bookshelf, and I left it in the office because I was like, oh well, I'm glad that this is my own, one of the first texts I've seen actually explicitly mention this. And so it's, Buddhism can be seen, and the path can be seen as pessimistic and morbid and scary and negative. Like, why is all the emphasis on suffering? For example, so if this is the case for someone who doesn't have a kind of experience and conceptualization of fundamentals of Buddhism, then it's sometimes best to approach it from speaking about the ultimate goals and what is achievable first, as a means of inspiring them and bringing a sense of joy into the path. There are different references in different chapters, particularly, let's say, chapter 2 of Pramana Vartika, those are meant to bring that sense of joy.
Yeah, but when they're
Impossibility,
talking about
yes.
fundamentals, His Holiness actually gave that advice.
Yes.
He's talking about the Four Noble Truths, and there is nothing more pessimistic than that. So there is no way out of there.
Yes.
Yes.
There's
So
no
he's
way out
starting
of-
with the noble
no way
truth
out of
of
the truth,
suffering. You know,
but
there's
maybe just
this
the
is a
approach
lot
to it.
less pessimistic
Yes.
what we're studying here
Yes, yes.
than the
So-
fundamentals.
So there's no way out of that truth, but the how pessimistic it feels might be impacted by how you start and by kind of the approach you take in before you kind of get dropped into that truth.
Yeah, but it's still here in this sentence. This is not what that's not the problem.
Yeah.
It doesn't imply that if one doesn't meditate,
Yes.
if one realizes that then they will die, they will engage in negative actions. That's
Yes.
not. I mean, this is an objection. Somebody who is completely
Yep.
unfamiliar with the Buddhist path.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's not the case here.
Yeah,
It's just the logic is not worked out.
Right.
It just makes no sense. Why, if we engage in negative deeds, why do we engage in negative deeds? It's because we have a strong sense of our permanence. The connection is not obvious. This illusion, so it's not the first sentence, but the last two. The illusion of permanence leads us to act as if we're going to live forever. Why is that? Okay, that's true. But why is the next and to entertain harmful intent, jealousy? If we feel that we're going to live forever, then we're not going to entertain harmful intent. And so this is one of the disadvantages of not meditating on death. And I can refer you to in this Bonko Rinpoche,
Yes.
the fifth disadvantage. If you look up the disadvantages,
Yes.
it's
yes.
it's much more clearly explained here. That same topic, that point. The disadvantage that we will develop a bad character.
Yes.
Same thing, basically.
Right,
We'll
right,
engage in
yeah.
negative deeds.
Right.
And it says, by failing to recall death, we become greatly attached to this life. So as we pursue the aims of this life, we react toward others with either desire, hatred, or ignorance, depending on whether they have tried to help or hinder us. We also fight and argue with others, and they in turn accuse us of having a bad character or treat us unfavorably. As a result, we end up causing ourselves all manner of harm, ranging anywhere from such things as cut on the head to other more serious injuries. So, the connection is much more clearly explained here.
Yes.
Although even this probably needs to be expanded, but
디 마스나 자르바.
나스.
갱기 저어디 나는데. 코니 참지 자단디 뜻 간지 다다시 간지 도서와 다다시 되게 메디서 하고 면도사. 간데 된다 코랑기 된다 섬주디 마 송으로. 아니 처음이다 고모디. 아니 미게벨레 사일라. 마사일라. 펭고르스. 마사이 탑let 두고르스. 아니 this the reason why we use 소에서 준지 아니 먼저 미게벨레 딱 랭이 저항이 맞돌는 거지 되게 차대원의 모토네 먼저 점에디 준지 하루 두고 알았는 거지 당진도 두고 알았어 아 따봐 되지 내가 시에는 아니 되니마 아니 코디 자오유베 토네 그러 이 땡네 아니 막이 내가 간좀 답에 당은 세들라 간지다 세들이 차네 다 아니만 주로 뭐 대주요 삼발 때네로 아니 벽에다 아니 지금 미게벨레 사이고 주고 알았어 간지 사고 알았어 dissolution and permanence is we're going to live forever 아니 셔서 디 단진 디게로다 아니 단진 딜 때네 짐바 딜 때네로 아니 지 차도 텐션 아니 시 녀모 아니 지 다하나시 랭에 사이오든 되네 고주고 알았어 송도 와서 또 코니 지 준지 그렇게 하죠
따따로라
어디 가래 주고 그랬어
안때로라 다고 단진레나 단진레나로 아니
콘 전에 던도 저 단진 레올 때는 인지민지 그게가 티 두거를 시작 하지 좀 인지민지 저거에 매왔어 나다 뭐 되지 예선이 코니 간지 디제술라
디 단진도 저거 주세요 디 단진도 저거 빼요 단진도 저거 가려라나 저 밀라 얘는 차도 제도잖아 차도 제도 그런 게시 단진 매오면 다 공에 지는 차도 레기 말 가르치려나 베시시나 랑기 민 진짜 집어라고 지와 샤샤 zinda chiba inanda ta leru chiba shasha leru di yabu charu de zana ko chadu legira chadu le de kharala na ko tandaro keche marada ko jima yabu charu re te ko jima bu degwe ba tanjin che de ro ko jima ta yabu charu che de na ko chadu chen da ko jima yabu chasare se ora da ko shigo yo mar sang ora da ko pagil tanjin she ora 수수인의 지마 코랑이 둘이디 토용데 전에 코랑 요거 시작해 वर 지마 코 되게 요거 시작해 되 거다 코 치고 요거다 코디버로 시르고 요거 섬 코고 말하고 지마데 뭐 되그란 데데도 전에 코기 미 마가서 되게 둘이 전부도 코 미는 지마 통그래서 또 도도 코 지마 시 말에 삼대 거다 코 그래서 다코 디버로 되는 마다베 도시티 매로 또 계시 마다베 도시 요지 드린 요조데 상이 요 말에 지마 코랑 파기 존리 토용데 전에 메디나 단다 코랑 차도 상이 메디니 뭐 디버루튼 깨지 주와 신신 바기 메디 레서 요 매워디 소와디 요나 코 차도 들리 말와
So Ishama was explaining kind of the logic behind the connection between those sentences there in that last paragraph. So the reason it says the reason why we engage in negative deeds is that we have a strong sense of our own permanence. So Ishama brought up the situation of, let's say, okay, well, let's say I think I permanent. I'm not thinking about my impermanence. I feel that I'm permanent. And I start, let's say, developing a sense of jealousy with someone who is, doing a better job than me at whatever activity that is. And this jealousy, there's a fear that they're going to do well, better than myself. And because of that, there's a jealousy. There's a dislike. But this is with the assumption that they will 100% be able to follow through because of that lens of permanence. If they're focused on impermanence, if in this instance, that wouldn't have that kind of impact. That thought process wouldn't occur, because who knows if that person is going to let's just satisfy oneself. If that person is actually going to be successful in that activity or scale the heights that will usurp you or surpass you, and then two, if I'm going to die, then what difference does it make? How can that impact me anyway? So it kind of using that kind of example, we can see how our sense of permanence leads to, or has rooting in the negative deeds that naturally. That we're not naturally, but that we're habituated to since beginningless times. Yeah.
지 타도 되러. 단 뇌샤를 찾아오는 것은 변매실에 이동을 쉬고 차대와. 거기 돈바데 계지 주의체는 그 김부 차고요 받은 것은 상도 쉬운 전부 담는 변매도 차고 싶고 전 지금 알아. 당어서 그 삼단데 가상 요와데 드린도 상이지만 되기를 텐션 되어서 그 차바시고 그래서 듭니다. 와서 그 서경지 나눠로 그 가져 주어두고 이것도 쓰다고 봅니다. 이 신유체와는 어서 변면으로 이제 차샤와 차야스게 말로 그때도 로카시 젤레도 되는 그 도마드즈니 마사 트라츠가 된 통문도 그 차야기도 설레온 거요. 그때 그 뭐다 그 주린도 단테 상담와는 되 잡아들리 말아.
So the arising of afflictive emotions is something that we don't have to strive for. It comes almost instinctively. And so kind of with that basis, we're already susceptible and vulnerable to misdeeds and negative actions, whether or not we understand the concept of impermanence or not. Now, another example we can use is, and how these directly correlates, is that when we find someone attractive, beautiful, handsome, you name it, that is with the basis of through the lens of permanence. Because if you saw this as impermanent, understanding that everything is momentary, or momentarily changing, one day they will not be. And actually, each moment they're getting closer and closer to no longer being attractive or handsome or beautiful. And so it is that attachment rooted in the view of permanence, or the distorted view of permanence that arises. For the sake of the session, we're 10 minutes past 9, so we'll stop here. But please hold on to that question. And then yes, I would even encourage you to write it down. But yes, again, for next week, please ask it. And anything that we've already gone through, please feel free to bring up as well. Yes. So we'll stop there for today. Rejoice with your participation. And as always, we'll end this session by dedicating our positive imprints and merit. And the dedication is on page 69. Let us dedicate our positive energy to the flourishing of Buddha Dharma throughout the world. Let us dedicate our positive energy to the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. May his sacred mandalas of body, speech, and mind be unharmed by negative intentions and actions. May he and other great masters be successful in fulfilling their dreams and visions for benefiting all sentient beings. Let us dedicate our positive energy to all spiritual communities throughout the world, so that they may flourish in their study, contemplation, and meditation. Let us dedicate our positive energy to the elimination of the problems in our world, such as famine, war, and conflict. May everyone in this and other world systems experience peace, happiness, and harmony. Let us dedicate our positive energy to ourselves and to other Dharma practitioners, so that we may overcome all obstacles to spiritual development. Let us dedicate our positive energy to ourselves and to all sentient beings, so that we can purify the obscurations to liberation and omniscience and quickly reach full enlightenment.